France riots. For the politicians, we are nothing. Amin was 17 when his brother's badly burned body was recovered from the boot of a torched car. My brother unfortunately fell into drugs early, he says, his face impassive as he glances up at the scruffy high-rise flats that surround us. We sit, talking about his brother, who had trafficked drugs before his murder, in one of Marseille's most notorious neighborhoods. Amin, now 19, grew up here on the Fraise Vallon estate, a vast and deprived social housing project in the north of the city, which is blighted by gang and drug-related violence. Not far away, a couple of young men lounge on a wall. Drug dealers work openly here in the harsh afternoon sunlight. Trafficking is, Amin says, a seductive choice for the children who grow up here and have little money, and even fewer prospects. There are no other options. There are no companies coming here and saying we'll pay you more than minimum wage. Here people are supermarket cashiers or cleaners or security guards. We can't be judges, lawyers or accountants. He wasn't surprised by the recent riots, which also flared in Marseille, where businesses including a gun shop were vandalized and looted. The riots followed protests over the fatal shooting by police of 17-year-old Nahal M. in Paris. We are always in the same mess, the same misery, and nothing will change, so I understand the anger of the young people. I don't justify the violence, but I understand it. The riots and their aftermath have revealed the depth of anger, frustration and abandonment felt by so many French citizens. We met Mado, a middle-aged woman who lives on the estate, near what used to be a community police station here. This was, for many, a physical link between them and the French state. Its demise grimly symbolic of an increasing disconnection. It's like living in a bin here, says Mado. It's not safe. People defecate in the lifts and stairwells. For the politicians, we are nothing. We are really nothing. A man, Murad, speaks angrily as he tells us that there are rats everywhere here. We don't all have the same rights. Politicians go on the media and say there are no second-class citizens, but it's not true in reality. But few, perhaps, comprehend more clearly the profound divisions in French society, or their consequences, than Amin. He now works to steer youngsters on the estate away from crime, but also supports the families of those who have paid with their lives. Last year there were 31 drug trafficking-related murders in Marseille. This year there have been 23. Two-thirds of the victims were under the age of 30. The French authorities have acknowledged both the tragedy and the problem. 2 years ago, President Emmanuel Macron promised to fix Marseille. He announced a €5 billion, £4.3 billion, $5.4 billion plan to tackle crime and deprivation in the city. He came back to the southern port city just before the riots to reinforce his commitment. Everything has to move faster, President Macron said at the beginning of a 3-day trip, in which he visited the sites of regeneration projects including a police station, a school, a prison and a hospital. But Amin, who has met him twice, has lost faith. When Macron comes, he comes to make announcements, not to listen to us. Even the mayor of Marseille, Benoit Payen, acknowledges that he needs to bring his city together. For too long my town has been divided between people who are poor and people who are not. Between those who are considered by the public authorities and those who are not. It is supposed to be a fundamental French value. But here, égalité, equality, is now an ambition. Crippling fuel crisis turns Cuba to old friend Russia. Cuban taxi driver Jorge Loro is reminded of his nation's historic ties to Russia every time he gets behind the wheel of his navy blue, Soviet-era Lada. His boxy Russian-made car is one of an estimated 100,000 that were imported to the Caribbean island during the Cold War. Over the years, the fleet of Ladas arrived in Cuba as a means around the decades-long U.S. economic embargo on the island. Now, amid a crippling fuel crisis and a dire economic outlook, the island's leadership has again turned to its old ally, Russia, for help. For Jorge, it's been a constant struggle to keep his car on the road. Spare parts are scarce and expensive. Now, even filling the tank with petrol has become a days-long ordeal. At the height of the crisis, the queues of cars at the petrol pumps stretched for several city blocks. Eventually, the state had to organize the hordes of waiting drivers into WhatsApp groups. A state employee would take down your contact details and issue a number. When it was eventually your turn to fill up, you'd be contacted to come to the garage. "I'm number 426, explained Jorge as he drove us to a petrol station in Havana, having received an alert. At the garage forecourt, though, no petrol was flowing after the tanker failed to arrive. I don't know why they even told us to come," complained Jorge. "This system is inefficient and ineffective," echoed another driver, Joel Hernandez, who was expressing the exasperation of everyone in the queue. "We're not allowed to fill an entire tank. People often miss their number or aren't informed when it's their turn. It lacks proper organization and infrastructure." For weeks, the fuel crisis has pushed the beleaguered Cuban people to the brink of desperation. It's the latest in a series of major challenges they have faced recently: food insecurity, inflation, and electricity blackouts. Cuba's long-standing woes stem from government mismanagement and the U.S. economic embargo, but were worsened by the collapse of the tourism industry during the coronavirus pandemic. For some Russian companies, though, that has presented a unique opportunity. At a recent trade forum in Havana, Cuba signed a series of agreements with Russian businesses covering everything from tourism and agriculture to. Among the deals reached were concessions to Russian firms to revitalize parts of the island's decrepit tourism infrastructure, including the decaying beach resort of Tarara. There will also be a joint project to overhaul an obsolete sugar mill in Sancti Spiritus province, as well as investment in ramen steel production. However, of most interest to Jorge and the other waiting drivers is an agreement for Russia to provide around 30,000 barrels of crude oil a day. That would help make up a shortfall in the island's domestic consumption after oil-rich socialist ally, Venezuela, dropped its crude oil exports to Cuba from 80,000 barrels a day in 2020 to around 55,000. It's being heralded in the Cuban state media as evidence of the two nations' lasting ties.